You make a bunch of noise out here, so they have peace and quiet in here. Because there's no better sound than the squeak-free guarantee from Advantech Subflooring and Advantech Subfloor Adhesive.
Pete Yost here for the UnBuild It podcast. I'm here with my usual cast of characters in Steve Basic.
Howdy, howdy.
But Jake is missing because we have a special guest. It is Chelsea Scharbach from the Build team here in Austin, Texas.
Hey.
And we welcome you to the UnBuild It podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up on the Build team.
Well, I moved to Austin in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Was looking to work at a small firm that did something hands-on, a little bit more than the normal architecture firm, and I landed at a small firm, husband and wife architects, called Stanley Studio. They have a metal shop, and I started in the metal shop there.
Oh, wow.
And my dad's a fabricator and welder, and so I had a little bit of experience doing that summer job kind of situation. And
Got Rosie the Riveter here.
yeah,
Cool.
I've done hot riveting actually on some gates on a
Nice.
hotel here in Austin, and then they didn't need architecture help at the time; they needed shop help. So I got my foot in the door that way, and then quickly got brought into the studio when they needed some help on some drawings, and I really kind of grew a love for construction and detailing and thinking about how things come together working for them because they were just really into the details.
So about how many projects did they do a year at that architectural firm?
Probably maybe we would usually have like maybe 3 or 4 going. Small projects. We did a lot of libraries here in Austin.
Oh, so it
and
was
public
commercial and residential?
No, I think I did one residential project there.
Ah.
And that's actually, and then I was like, you know what? I love residential. It's small, it's detailed. You can get to know the client in a different way.
Interesting.
And jumped out on my own and did residential architecture for 3-ish years. I kind of like had my foot in the door, work for them part-time, then do some on my own. And then ran into Matt at a building science lecture series with Joe Stebrick a few years ago. And we
Everything
kept in
goes back
touch.
to Joe
I know,
somehow.
I know.
Yeah.
And I just had a good conversation with him, and then Tim later, and here I am. Started working here about 7 or 8 months ago.
So where did you get your architectural training?
I went to Oklahoma State. I'm from Oklahoma, and my dad's an engineer. Both of my sisters are engineers. We all went to school at Oklahoma State. Just
What's the
kind
song, Oklahoma, where the sun doesn't shine, or what is it?
where the wind comes
Where
sweeping
the-
on the plane.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
lots of weather there. Yeah.
That's the first time I've heard Steve sing on an UnBuild It podcast.
Will you sing the rest?
well, that's because you
for
never
us?
make karaoke night when we're at IBS.
Okay,
where
that's another
it's a
whole
whole
issue.
other story.
Yeah.
But we won't go there.
So I'm going to ask you, when's the first time you heard about Steve?
Probably listening to some of Matt's videos. I think I probably saw a video with Steve. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we just actually did an episode on Steve and his innovation and details. And so tell us a little bit about your work for the Build Show in particular in terms of architecture.
Well, I think right now I've come in as an in-house architect to be. I feel like I'm a tool for the home building side of the company, where I think ultimately doing some design build is in the future. But at this point, I've been really involved in the pre-construction process, onboarding clients, talking to their consultants, and helping them get ready for construction. And then also there's been a few things here and there with detailing, frequently, I think Steve knows this, and
Yep.
during construction things come up, and maybe the architect that we originally were working with is just too swamped to get to it, or is less engaged. And I think it's kind of nice to be able to just ask someone in the office, hey, what should we do here?
Yeah. So Matt is, out finding clients, and then he does a bit of a handoff to you with some clients, or to get the design process rolling?
Well, so a lot of our clients so far, we haven't done fully in-house design. I would think the Risinger build right now is probably the closest, where I've helped Steve with some of his drawings, getting them ready for permitting and that kind of thing. But most of our clients come to us with an architect and a design team already, and it's more about meeting with them in the year or so preceding construction.
And I don't really know how much Matt's build company does remodeling.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah.
Whole house remodels, a lot of those.
Do those clients often come with their own architect?
Sometimes not. Like when I first started, there was a project that they had, I think, like a building designer do their drawings. So they didn't really have an architect on board during construction, and it's a whole house remodel. And I got to help with some details on that, do some stair railing details, and
Cool.
help the client pick some different things.
And we hear through Jake mostly that you have a pretty interesting project going on of your own.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I don't know if you're familiar with Joseph Eichler. He's a famous California developer.
Yeah, so that was they're all really, really low slope buildings, and there's actually quite a few of them in this area of Texas. And I think it's because there was somebody moved from a certain place, and these houses sort of popped up in the Austin area.
Maybe, I'm not really sure. So
But-
Eichler is well known for California sort of
Yes.
mid-century modernism, and then we've got a local sort of starchitect, A.D. Stanger, who is,
yes.
and he's compared. A lot of people say he's kind of the Austin Eichler.
Yeah,
But
interesting.
he's done over 100 houses in Austin area, and I just bought one of his houses.
And so that was, you said, like 1950s, 60s? And so that's how old the house is that you purchased?
Yeah, it was built in, I think, 63. And I think he graduated architecture school from UT in around 50. Or, well, actually, so he didn't graduate. He passed his exam, was about to graduate, dropped out of school, decided he wanted to make money.
Oh, interesting.
And so he designed, and I've seen photos of him actually working on the houses. I think he did some of the work.
Wow.
So we've got a little house. It's in the one of his developments is a Stanger edition. It's in Barton Hills, which is right behind Barton Springs. And there's like a dozen or so houses right there that he did all of them. They kind of line the street. You
Wow.
turn a corner and it's
So it's
kind
like a Stinger neighborhood?
It is. Yeah.
So what are
So-
some of the challenges, and I'm going to use this expression, you can say that that's not actually how it's happening, but dragging, kicking and screaming a 1960s building into
Yeah.
what we consider a high performance home today.
Yeah. Well, I think a big consideration for me is just budget and timeline, and not wanting to have two houses at the same time, really. So we haven't moved in. We're doing some minimal work on the front end, and I think long term I'm going to look at doing some other stuff. But our biggest move for increasing efficiency and making it more comfortable is we're planning to rip off the whole roof and add insulation to the top before we re-roof it.
And for these homes, they are all slab on grade
For the most part, yeah.
and really big roof systems generally.
Yeah,
right?
a lot of really like low slope roofs.
So one-story low slope roofs.
They do have good overhangs. Mine has
Yeah.
really great overhangs
Like
over the whole thing.
4 feet. I mean, they're
Yeah,
big
exactly.
overhangs.
Like
Yeah.
mine, I think there's a difference. There's like maybe the shortest one is maybe 2 feet, and the bigger side is probably 4 feet.
So when you talk about going after the roofing system, that's a really big part of the whole
Exactly.
enclosure.
Yeah.
So what are the challenges there?
Well, right now the biggest challenge I'm facing is figuring out how to properly detail. We came in and tore out the previous owner had added insulation in the ceiling between some beams that are about 3.5 by 5.5 inches.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're overspanned. And so between these beams, they've added fiberglass bat insulation and then covered it up with a radiant barrier. And then put drywall on top of that, taped the seams. I'm not really sure like what their thought process was there.
Yeah.
And then hung fabric over it, like drapes.
Do the drapes follow the roof line? Or?
So they're like, they were stretched across. It's a single, it's just a shed roof in that area.
Wow.
So we pulled out the fabric
Roof
first.
drapery.
Yeah, I've never seen it before. I don't recommend it. It was pretty dusty. And we pulled that out. We pulled out all the drywall and the insulation. Found some black spots in there, some growth, and got that all cleaned up. And are planning. It's got newer plywood roof deck. I don't know what was originally there. And we're planning to take that out and put in tongue and groove. But currently, I'd like to get your advice. My current plan, I talked to a structural engineer friend of mine. Her name's Erica, and also Matt's partner, Tim. But these beams are overspanned. They're about 30 inches on center.
Wow.
And the span...
It's more like a hammock.
Yeah. The span is, I think it's like about 15.5 feet on the inside, but then they also overhang. It's probably
So 30 on center, 15-foot span?
probably about 20 feet total length, or a little over 20 feet, including the overhangs.
That's like framing drapery to begin with.
Exactly, yeah. So my plan is to go over the top with tongue and groove, and then add a 2x and an angle on top, and attach down into the beam. Does that make sense?
So on top, like a strong back approach, sort of?
I don't know. I don't know what to call it.
As you explain it, this is something that's going to go on the top side of the roof?
Yes.
Yeah. So
And
isn't that
then-
like a strong back, Steve?
Is that what you
Yeah,
call that?
it could be. The understand though, the large overhangs are actually to your advantage, not disadvantage,
Oh, for sure.
because they
yeah.
create a negative moment over the wall. So it actually, it's like if you and I were on a
It's like a
seesaw
cantilever.
and I stepped a foot from the center,
Right.
it wouldn't do much, right? But if I step
It's
4
like a
feet,
fulcrum.
yeah, if I step 4 feet, it's going to make a big difference
Yeah.
in what happens.
I never
So
thought about
think of
that
2
an overhang
seesaws.
changes the loading.
Creates a negative moment. It actually pulls the floor
Yeah.
joist up.
Yeah.
It has to be strong enough to withstand the
No,
deflection.
in this case, the rafter.
The rafter does. Yeah. But I was thinking about, you have options to do, you either do something on the inside or you do something on the outside. If you want to keep it somewhat clean on the inside, then yeah, you're forced to go up above it and do something. But you could potentially lag into them with some kind of angle, especially if you're going to put insulation, and bury that steel angle in the insulation above.
Yeah.
So it sounds as though you're going to do some topside work. Will that give you the opportunity to do continuous exterior insulation on the top side?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah. And the house is only about 1,200 square feet. It's got a 2-car carport attached to it, and it's a pretty simple shape. It's basically like a box with a cutout. It's like kind of an entry courtyard that you enter into.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
think
kind of
that's
C-shaped.
fairly common in these designs, isn't
Yeah,
it?
courtyards, atriums, getting
Yeah,
natural
yeah.
light in. It's got great natural lighting.
Have you ever worked on one of these types of buildings,
No,
Steve?
I've done some mid-century modern, not an Eichert house. But one of the challenges when you put insulation on the top side is the thing already has 4-foot overhangs, which I'm assuming they're pretty substantial in depth already, right? It's not a 2x4, right? Going the
It's
4
probably
foot.
so the beams on the inside are spanning out, and then between them they've got, I think, like a 2x6 between them. So I do want to minimize the look of that roof line, and what I'm
Yeah,
thinking
what I'm getting
is
is you have probably a substantial fascia already, and now if you add insulation, it's like we go from 6 or 7 inches to 12 inches. What does that look like, and how
Well,
do you solve for that?
I'm thinking if the angles and the beams are continuing out over the wall also, that I could just move the fascia up, and you can see the existing beams below, but then the fascia's up above them.
You could do something like that. You'd probably have to treat the end of the beam because it's going to be
Right.
susceptible to taking on moisture. And
Yeah, I mean, I just remembered when we were doing all the green homes for Green Building Advisor, it's basically just case studies. But a lot of them were new construction, but there was an awful lot of retrofits. One of them was an Eichler home or a Stinger home.
Oh, really?
Here in Austin, I think.
Interesting.
So we
Okay.
should look up that case
I
study
want to.
because I remember that when they did that project, one of the big issues was, well, now you've got these framing members that are moving from conditioned space to unconditioned space, and it's not a monopoly house, right?
No, not at all.
Not at all. So how do you deal with that to make sure that you've got airtightness there and not a thermal bridge?
Yeah.
In our neck of the woods in the Northeast, timber framers just love to have these beams, particularly roof, run from inside to outside
They
the
just
building.
look so good.
They look beautiful, and
Yeah.
the problem is that they move, and so they're airtight when the project's new. But I know I'm going to get a call from that builder 2 years down the road, and they're going to say, "Yeah, we got all this funky growth, and the timbers are getting a little punky." I said, "I told you if you don't abandon those timbers moving from the inside to the outside of the building in a climate that's cold as ours, they're going to move a little bit. You'll lose your air seal, and then you're going to have all kinds of problems with condensation and growth." And I tell them, "Why don't you just do a monopoly house, Oh my, this is a timber frame. You can't chop those suckers off at the wall and then stick them on afterwards. That's sacrilegious."
Yeah.
And lo and behold, there's a project on Green Building Advisor about how to do a monopoly house post and beam timber.
Okay.
You know.
Well, I got to go look that up.
Yeah, because you can do it. It's
Yeah.
just heretical if you're a timber
Yeah.
framer.
Yeah.
So I hadn't thought about that. We should definitely look up that case study of that project. Don't remember who the remodeler was, but my recollection is it was on some kind of Austin green builder home tour at some point.
Interesting.
Because Austin has one of the oldest and pretty incredible green building home building program
Okay.
across the country.
Huh.
Pretty sure that's what that was. So tell me a little bit about working with Steve on details for projects. How does that work?
Well, we haven't had a good chance yet, but I
No.
think that's coming up on
Yep.
the Risinger build.
Oh, so there's a project coming up where that's
So
going to be the case.
Steve did schematic design and I would say into design development on the project that we just started construction on, and I put together like the permit set for it. And I think that you're currently working on details for
we
some
are.
of our
We're working on them.
yeah, similar to what
working
you
on a
did on
lot of
Matt's
things.
house. Yeah. So
Well, there's a lot of players. The problem, one of the things about the industry is that there's, for that we have a ready frame package.
Oh,
So
right.
it's like they've already drawn up the framing, they've already tilted the sills. So there's like a bunch of things that somebody's already identified a few of the ingredients to the recipe. So it's not like a
So
typical.
is that more challenging because
It
of
is
that?
because
Yeah.
you have a few more cooks in the kitchen, and it's not a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a different than what I'm used to sitting there late at night,
Yeah.
got my light on, and I do my thing.
Yep.
And it's like now, and it's not with Chelsea. It's the like the ready frame. It's like we already have a sloped sill there. That I wasn't aware of that.
So
now-
why are we
now
using
we-
ready frame on this project? It's just a different approach to the framing system.
Yeah, and the framers like it. The timing, everything comes out. It's all pre-cut. It's like there's no. It's
should
all
eliminate
labeled.
waste.
Yeah, a lot of those things.
So is this panelized or
No, it comes pre-cut. all
it's a pre-cut
banded,
package?
and
Okay.
you just pull it apart. The sticks are just already cut.
A little bit like a Sears home, Sears Roebuck
kind
home,
of.
maybe.
Kind of.
Okay.
The guy in we knew who's the cool builder in Vegas and Phoenix for was it Del Webb or Pulte?
Oh yeah. Oh gosh.
He was
we
probably
went
one of the
through
coolest,
this before. What the heck was his name? All right,
But they did the same thing. I mean, years ago.
Randy?
And then Randy Foltz.
Randy Foltz. Ah, we pulled it out. The two of us together.
He was really
was
cool.
cool.
Their operation was absolutely incredible.
This is the Building America program. We were one of the teams at Building Science Corporation. So we worked with builders production all across the United States, and there were always these couple standouts, and Randy Foltz was one of
Yeah,
them.
and he basically did a ready frame package.
That's
They
right,
would
he
cut
did.
it, and they would cut all the
They had
headers.
huge
and put it-
yards of these
Oh.
packages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a picture somewhere. It's about the size of a football field.
I know the photo you're
and it's
talking
about 30 feet of OSB. It
Yeah.
looks like a
Yeah.
building, but it's a stack of OSB, and I have to find that photo because,
Yeah.
like, a person standing in front of it looks like an ant. And when you say, "Well, that's just all OSB," it's like, holy crap, that is a ton. But it's not. You know, it's kudos to Builders First Source. I'm not saying that it doesn't work or won't work or they can't make it work. I'm just saying in 30 years, I've seen this kind of wave.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? People try things and it didn't quite work out, and then somebody resurrects it and it doesn't quite work out, and then panelization, and you know, you have B Public in New Mexico trying to do panelization and pre-insulated stuff. We had the guy up in Maine doing it there. So it's a little different when you're working with all of these companies, and even like a timber framer, right? I'm doing a project now where we are doing a SIPS roof and a system, and like me and the structural engineer can't really do anything until they're done with their system. The structural engineer needs to know how the loads are going to come down through the building
Right,
now,
right.
and I can't really do anything until the structural engineer has the answer to how are things going to come down through the building. And so it makes things a little more challenging, but
Chelsea-
not in a bad way.
Yeah. So you start off by saying you have two sisters that are engineers. So I'm always
What kind of
interested in
engineers?
Civil and chemical.
Okay.
civil and chemical. I'm always interested in when architects make their own structural decisions and when they turn to a structural engineer. I'm working on a project in Rockport, Massachusetts, where the architect is making all the structural decisions. We've asked him, he said, you know, there's some really complex load transfers in this building because it's been sort of cut and parceled together over 100 years. So until we stripped the building from the inside, we thought we understood how the loads were being transferred. And when we got it fully gutted, you know, people were like, whoa, some of this stuff is not even close to working. And I was expecting the architect to say, we really need to get a structural engineer. And without a blink, he said, oh no, this is my job. I do all the structure.
Yeah.
So I just wonder how each of you, like, when do you push the button and say, structural engineer is going to make this call?
Yeah. Well, I think based on what I've seen from Steve's drawings, I think we might be coming from two completely different approaches. And I think a lot of it has to do with your schooling and maybe like how you practice regionally. Because I actually started out as a double major. I was going to do the architectural engineering, which is structural engineering.
Yeah.
And decided to drop it. And
So
like
Oklahoma State has an
you
architectural
can do
engineering?
you can do a dual. It's a
interesting.
structural, but it's more geared toward architectural.
Would you believe I have a degree in architectural engineering?
Oh, really?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
From Wentworth Institute, your degree is
First 2 years was architectural engineering, and then you reapply to the school for the Bachelor of Architecture.
How could I have heard the
Interesting.
story of Wentworth Institute all these years and not know that you had 2 years of architectural engineering?
A lot
Wow.
of places don't have the. That's kind of interesting.
It was a
that-
core program, and then
No
people went
kidding.
on to different things: construction management, architecture,
I had
bachelor's
no
in
idea.
architectural engineering.
What?
So
It's funny
very
because
much
we
in
always
stasis.
talked about like Penn State, a great architectural engineering program, University of Waterloo. Just really something that I didn't know that.
But go ahead, I'm
Yeah.
intrigued.
Oh, but I think so. But I've only practiced here in Austin as an architect, and I think it'd be very abnormal for an architect to take on the structural. So it's fun. I love math, and I actually really liked all the engineering classes I took.
Yeah.
But my default is always get a structural engineer. Where on the flip side, and Steve probably has a lot more detail to go into this since he actually has the educational background in it. But from Steve's drawings, a lot of his drawings look like what you would get from a structural engineer also.
Yeah, well, I think, where I come from is I believe somebody needs to have pretty much all the answers, right? When we're doing a project in Boston and the general contractor or the framer has a question, he goes to the general contractor calls, hey, Tom is here, we're framing this, we have a question about the stairs. What I don't want to have to tell them is, well, let me call John, the structural engineer, and because that inevitably is going to take a day or two. And Tom, the framer, is standing
waiting
there with 5 guys waiting for an answer.
Yeah.
So at least back home, when we're doing regional projects, I work with our structural engineer. I do all the structural drawings, and I will put in what I assume would be the sizes of the beams. And then he does a cursory review. And just
So he's the
checks them
review.
off.
Okay.
He just checks it off, or he says, hey, you could downsize this beam, or this beam really needs to be upsized. Occasionally there I paint myself into a corner and said, John, I need to figure this one out.
Yeah,
Because we have
yeah.
like 3 beams doing this, and we have one now that there's this one spot. It's like, how do we solve for this? And he always has really good answers. But I do it because I just want to have the understanding. So when the mechanical guy says, oh, well, we need to get 2 trunks to the attic, then I can provide that solution for him, right? And then I can pass it on to the structural engineer and say, hey, for this, we need these 2 holes 20 by 24 inches that are going to go through the first floor frame and through the ceiling plane. And he's like, oh, okay, no problem. And then his job's real easy because he has that information.
Do you typically have like a stamped structural set, or is that something
No,
that
I
you're...
stamp everything. My
Okay.
structural engineer does the review. I edit it. I use, and if it's a simple house, I'll edit it and we'll send it out and we'll get our permit. If it's a more complex house, I'll edit the drawing, send them back for a secondary review. So he'll just give a look, because occasionally we'll do some things that like I'm just not used to. And like we just did a house, we had 2 moment frames, and I did the details and stuff. And John will provide the sketches, and I just send it back and say, I just want to make sure I captured your intent.
So you keep using John's name. Do you have your structural
That's our
engineer?
structural engineer in the Boston area, John.
Yeah. So you don't move from structural engineer to
No,
structural
but other
engineer.
places, I mean, we're doing
Yeah.
a project in Alabama, and
Yeah.
we got this guy Scott out of Florida,
Yeah.
and he's licensed in like 6 states, so I'll use him in like North Carolina and South Carolina and
Interesting.
Georgia, and but some of them do want to do their work, but I'll still do just a basic floor framing plan, and so it's like, here, this is the direction I'm assuming the floor joists are going in. We're going to use roof trusses, blah blah blah.
So do you have a default structural engineer for the build company?
Yeah, we work with Smith Structural. Yeah.
He's very sharp. Whit's a good guy.
Yeah.
Whit's a good guy. So we've used him through them for projects. So
Yeah, they're great.
So I hear this a lot. When I taught a course on green building at Yale, and there were quite a few. It was at the graduate level, and there were quite a few students from the master's program in architecture at Yale that would come take this green building course. And when I would say, well, this week we're going to talk about building science, it was basically 12 weeks. Every week was a different topic in green building, like indoor air quality or energy efficiency. Or material selections. And I twice had students that were in the master's program come up to me and say, I'm just about to complete the 5-year program, and this is the first time I've heard the term building science. And I said, well, that's not, I don't know why that's happened, but you should probably go talk to your architectural department. And this is the truth. One student, I won't use her name, but she was a graduate student. She came back to me and she said, I went to talk to the dean of the School of Architecture about this. When I thought, okay, now I'm going to be really in trouble. And the dean said, yes, it's true that we don't spend much time on building science or building physics. And there's a good reason for that, and it's that our curriculum is so packed with courses, we just simply don't have sort of the course bandwidth. And this was the next thing she said. We know that you're going to get that training on the job. And
they're not.
I thought, you're going to wait to teach people hygrothermal principles of how buildings work on the job? And the student came to me and said, yes, that's what she said. And she said, that scares the crap out of me, that I don't know anything about this, and I'm going to figure it out as I go. So how much in your training did you have the type of building science that Steve and I were kind of
I mean,
raised on?
maybe I feel like I kind of got lucky in a way because like there's different degrees. I have the 5-year bachelor's degree, and I had 2 semesters. I'm blanking on what the class was called, but it was essentially a lot of stuff about MEP, and it was just like, but we looked at a bunch of different things, the physics behind systems and how buildings work. And maybe I think my school like leans a little bit heavier toward the engineering side of things, whereas some I think are more like an artistic approach. I think it was pretty heavy on like coordination and I mean design for sure, but if you're not thinking about building science during design, it's not something that just gets tacked on.
You're really preaching to the choir, of course, but I was a lowly lecturer, like literally at schools like that, particularly Yale, the hierarchy is, like full professors, deans, full professors, assistant professors, associate professors, and then in between associate professors and lecturers was graduate students. They had more influence than the lecturers. Yeah, so there's a story
but
behind that.
The thing is though, like that class, I wish I would have known then that class mattered as much as it did, because 2 semesters of a class could really go a long way. But it was the most boring class I had by a long shot.
Yeah, it was like
so
taught
funny.
because it had to be taught, not because it wanted to be taught.
And well, and I think the professor that taught it really loved it, but his passion for it didn't translate well.
That
Or
is
wasn't
so
It was
communicated
probably
well.
outdated too.
Yeah.
Well, because, the reason Steve and I thrive on this is because Joe Stiebrick is just a master at getting people excited about building physics.
I mean, 2 of my kids went to architecture school. Both schools, I said, hey, I sent an email to the dean of architecture saying, hey, I'm pretty fluid in building science. I'd be willing to come down and give you guys a free lecture. I didn't even get a reply to the email.
That's a shame.
I didn't know you had done that, and
Our profession is horrible. Absolutely horrible. I'm sorry to say it, but it is. It's horrible.
Well, to be
And we
fair,
educate. No, I won't be
it's
fair.
really hard. Well, it's
won't be
really
fair.
hard though because I think
There's a lot to learn, but our focus. Nobody's ever gotten sued because a building was ugly.
But what I was going to say is I think the hard part is architecture. The profession has grown to encompass so much, and buildings have become so much more complex than. You know what I mean? So
I do agree
there's
with
a
you.
lot. There's a lot to learn.
But it's interesting because when I do a lot of design spec reviews on projects in no small measure because Steve gets all kinds of folks to come to him and say, hey, you're not going to be my architect, but could you review the...
I could employ 10 people tomorrow, full time, doing nothing but details for other projects that were designed.
Yeah.
I get calls almost
Well, that's why consultants
daily.
exist.
Well, so
No, I know, but the
Yeah.
story is, hey, we have a really great design. Our architect did a good job, but they really don't have an understanding on how to do the wall sections and some of the details that you talk about.
So sadly, Steve sends me a lot of folks. He says, I'm not going to clean up your drawings or add that.
I want the architect
I don't
to go out
live
of
for
business.
that.
That's my business
Yeah,
model.
so he sends them to me, and then I do design spec reviews for continuous control layers and so on. But what I was going to say is that when I talk about my perspective on buildings as a building enclosure consultant, I never wanted to be an architect. And one of the primary reasons is you all have 20 lenses that you have to bring to the project, right? I have one.
I'm kind of jealous, honestly. Yeah,
Well,
because
so
you
when
can
I
actually focus.
review, I said, look, I'm looking through one pair of glasses.
Well, you could focus. I'll send you all the emails for the people, and you sit there
Well,
and draw
no,
details
actually-
for other people. I'm telling you, I could do it.
I do like
easily.
editing other people's work.
But if you're going to be trained to look through all these different lenses,
Yeah.
and building science is not even one of them,
Yeah.
that's the underlying problem.
So I have a question
definitely.
for you. Out of all of those, right, what kind of percentage is the architect looking at you to help them versus the architect looking at you to do that part and add it to their work?
Well, because I'm not a licensed architect, I tell them very clearly, I'm giving you guidance and recommendations, You are still stamping the plans. It's still your project.
Because there's been many times you and I have done lectures, people to a room full of architects, they come up afterwards and they ask you a question, and it's like, really? We just spent an hour and a half talking about that. Well, I know, and I'll watch that later, but this detail here that I'm doing on this project,
It
it's
happens all the
they
time.
don't want to learn. It's like it's not ingrained in our education to kind of search for those answers. Those answers will be given to me by somebody.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think
Joe's
some-
made a living by giving that answer.
Yeah, but I've heard you describe your education at Wentworth Institute, and you were really lucky in that you got a pretty good base there, and then they connected you with Building
They
Science
connected me with Building
Corporation.
Science Corporation.
And I think sometimes people, unless you've seen it applied in lots of different ways, it's really hard to grasp a principle that's new to you.
Yeah, yeah. And that's part of the problem is if you don't introduce it
Yeah.
early on in education and you try to stick it on later. I mean, I like to do design spec reviews, but my objective is, and this has happened with a number of architects, I'm doing a lot of work on the first project. And then the second project, I get fewer questions. I have a couple of architects where I haven't heard from them in 3 or 4 years because they're doing their own design and spec
Nice.
review.
They've learned from you.
I was doing a 2-day building science training for the New Hampshire AIA, and the guy who was the president was a very prominent architect from Concord. And the training was a full day of building science, a discussion in the morning, and then the rest of the afternoon was take what you've learned and apply it to a set of drawings. So like 6 architects would bring in their projects, they break into teams. And this is what happened on this training. Second day, this architect raised his hand. He said, I am so freaking angry right now that we have no idea what we're doing. All you did was jam building science down our throats yesterday, and there's no way we're going to be able to review this set of drawings. And the room just got deathly quiet. And the architect who was the president of AIA stood up and he said, that is total BS. We need to understand this stuff because our butts are on the line. And he said, Peter, can I hire you to review 10 of my most recent projects for building performance? And I said, well, sure. And the guy who was complaining stood up, he goes, that is asinine. He's going to ream your projects in front of your clients, and it's going to kill your business. And
Would you rather have him ream it in a courtroom?
What he said was, I'd rather have this guy ream me
Yeah.
than a lawyer. So that day, in the next 2 years, I went and I visited 10 of his projects. You know what it did to his business?
I'm sure it increased it. It
And
has
all
to.
those people went, holy crap, my architect came back 5 years later with this building science guy, and they did all this testing on our home. And yeah, there were some problems were identified, but X, Sheldon is his name, I'm going to recommend him to all these people.
course,
So
yeah.
his business went up. It didn't go down.
Yeah, why? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think a lot of people want to learn, but they don't know where to start, or
Yeah.
it just feels overwhelming on the front end.
Well, we can now add Oklahoma State to the architectural engineering because that's the discipline that really embodies embracing both design and building performance, building science.
Yeah, and I mean, it is creeping into some schools, I think. But it just...
Not the 2 your kids attended.
No,
apparently.
I mean, Lexi came to work and she's like, yeah, Dad, I didn't learn any of this. And what was interesting is while she was in school, she was working on some projects for some environmental classes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And like the information they gave her was wrong. And some of the information, like, go read this. And I was like, yeah, that's really not
Interesting.
true. And it's just and I get it. There is an abundance of information out there, and it's hard to disseminate what should I believe, what shouldn't I believe, etc. But I don't think our profession does a good job of at least trying. And they don't even leave you don't even leave the college with an understanding that it exists. I mean, I went down. I know we got to close this up, but I'll leave you with this. It was a master's degree program in architecture. I went down there, and one of Lexi's classmates was doing a funeral home in Maine. Okay? And for whatever reason, that was his thesis project. So a little morbid, but I get it. It was a concrete framed building, concrete walls, uninsulated
In Maine.
in Maine.
Is this a trick question?
No. I was just like, how do you let this guy walk out of a
Five-year
college?
program.
Oh,
Yeah.
it wasn't. It was a 7-year master's degree
Wow.
in architecture. And it's not even a little smack like, hey, buddy, maybe a little insulation on that concrete wall. We are in Maine up here, right? There's this thing, climate zone map, maybe.
You don't understand. They want to keep the building cold because it helps the bodies.
I was going to say, I don't see a problem if it's a
makes
funeral
the-
home.
Makes the funeral go a little faster. I get it, but it's just, that's what I'm saying is like we don't, and I mean, when I was in school, it was really interesting. We had a couple teachers, like we had one from Cooper Union, like he was like totally hell bent on design and stuff, didn't really care about how the building went together. But I did have some other practical, one that went to Pennsylvania. He actually worked with Louis Kahn or under people that worked with him, and he had a really good sense of like how do you think you would put this together. Like he didn't have the answer to building science, but he at least asked the questions. Like how do you think this would go together? Like how do you think, what does that wall look like? What does that roof look like? And you had to do something. And it was, I look at my drawings now and go, oh my God, that was horrendous. What the hell was I thinking? But it was something other than just 2 lines that were 2 feet apart and said, this is the ceiling or the roof system.
Figure it out yourself.
I think ultimately it's like there's so much information being thrown at you that it's really hard to come up with like a cohesive and fully fleshed out idea.
Yeah.
And I think it's just the kind of thing that you just need a lot of experience.
Well,
you know?
I'm going to put under Pete's resources. John Straub and Eric Burnett from the Penn State University wrote a book called Building Science for Building Enclosures. And it's definitely the resource for incorporating architectural engineering into buildings. Sadly, it was a single printing, and it's no longer in print, but there's copies available secondhand on eBay. But it's sad because it is the textbook that John wrote for teaching his courses at the University of Waterloo, and he's never done.
I'm
a
gonna have to
second
look
printing.
that up. I don't think I have that one.
You know where you can look it up? You can go
Where?
to our website and it'll be under Pete's resource.
Okay, awesome.
Chelsea, great having you.
Thank you.
So glad you're with the Build team. And if you have questions, you can send them to questions at UnBuild podcast. And with that, Steve, you have any little thing?
I do have a recommendation. You should never use a double negative when you're talking. It's a no-no.
It's pretty bad.
It's but he just.
He can't help
Do you know
himself.
the person who wrote in with how much they look forward to Steve's job? The person ended with, "It's his delivery that is so well done." And I thought, oh man, now we're never going to get rid of this.
Yeah.
People love jokes. I told you.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thanks,
Thank
Steve.
you, Chelsea.
Take care now.
Bye-bye.